In New York in the 1980s, the emergence of crack cocaine brought a new wave of violence. Drug dealers robbed and killed as they scrambled for power. Ordinary citizens were victimized. Even children were not immune. The FBI joined forces with the New York City police to take back the streets. Their best weapon against deadly drug gangs was the C-11 squad.
New York City is no stranger to gang violence. But when a 12-year-old child was kidnapped, the gangs had crossed the line. Law enforcement raced to find the missing boy before it was too late. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents would have to infiltrate the secretive world of a vicious gang to stop the murderous exploits of a drug lord.
In the 1980s, crack cocaine invaded the Harlem section of New York, as it did many urban areas in America. Over time, the cheap and highly addictive drug crippled communities unlike any other drug had before. With the crack came ruthlessly violent gangs that ruled the streets. No one was truly safe. On December 5th, 1989, 12-year-old Donnell Porter was walking to elementary school alone. He never made it to class that day. When he didn't arrive home after school, his family worried. They hadn't been able to find him in the neighborhood. At 9 p.m., Donnell's sister received a phone call.
Yeah.
A man on the other end said Donnell had been kidnapped. He wanted $500,000 or the boy would be killed.
Inside the men's bathroom.
The sister said the family didn't have that kind of money. It didn't matter to the caller.
Yeah.
He warned them not to contact police, then instructed them to go to a restaurant at 125th and Broadway. Behind a trash can in the restroom, they'd find something that would prove he was serious.
You got it?
A family friend went to the restaurant so the Porters could stay by the phone. He didn't know if it was a setup. Following the kidnapper's orders, he checked behind the trash container and found a coffee can. Inside were 2 rings, an audio cassette, and a child's severed finger. Donnell was hurt and could be bleeding to death. Despite being warned not to, the family called the New York City police.
Following you, looking at you. Nobody standing around.
The family told investigators what they knew. Detectives inspected the evidence. The sister said that the rings belonged to Donnell. They'd been given to the boy by his older brother. On the tape, a recorded plea for help was definitely Donnell's voice. The family told detectives about a second call in which the kidnapper had lowered his ransom to $350,000. It was still far beyond their means. They said they didn't know why they were targeted for such a high ransom. But detectives knew what the family wouldn't say.
So you came straight back.
The victim's older brother, Richard Porter, was a major crack cocaine dealer in the area. Police believe the kidnapping was related to his drug empire. NYPD contacted the New York FBI's reactive squad for assistance. Special Agent David Higgins, a narcotics expert, was asked to provide more intelligence on Richard Porter.
Anything they have, any of them.
Richard Porter, then about 25 years of age, was a well-known crack dealer whose activities took place in central Harlem. He was one of those individuals who got in early on the crack trade in New York, and he had created a significant drug empire in central Harlem.
Richard Porter had made millions of dollars selling crack on New York's streets. Detectives knew where his turf was.
What's going on, man?
It didn't take long to find Porter. Detectives recognized the person he was with as his drug-running partner, Alpo Martinez. This visit wasn't about drugs. It was about finding Donnell. Porter agreed to come to the station for an interview, though he said he didn't know how he could help.
Look, guys, I don't know anything.
Police knew Porter was very close to Donnell, but he claimed to know nothing about who was behind his brother's kidnapping. On the streets, these matters are usually solved without the cops.
I don't know no one.
Though Porter most likely held the key to finding Donnell, he was in no position to talk to authorities.
Richard Porter, because of his situation as a drug trafficker, found himself in a ticklish situation legally. It would have been difficult for him to cooperate directly with law enforcement. I believe he attempted to handle this situation on his own to some extent.
Police had nothing to hold him on. Authorities needed to find someone else to help them. They canvassed the area, trying to gather information on the kidnapping. In such a close-knit neighborhood, someone had to have heard something about Donnell. But residents were too afraid to talk. Harlem's violent gangs had a stranglehold on the community. Detectives were left with nothing. With each passing day, police in NYPD's 32nd precinct knew Donnell's chance of survival decreased. Investigators maintained contact with the boy's family, who were desperate for more word from the kidnappers.
We need to get to the bottom of this. Take a
A
look
week
at that.
after the abduction, the family received a note. In it, the kidnappers hinted Donnell was still alive.
The child is in pain.
They demanded their money.
Assistance.
We gotta do something medically.
But no more ransom calls came. With no clues to the boy's whereabouts and no one talking, police had reached a dead end. They somehow needed to pressure Richard Porter into
We gotta
cooperating,
get him back in here.
or hope he would pay the ransom to get Donnell back. Then, on January 4th, 1990, a month after Donnell's abduction, the body of his brother, drug kingpin Richard Porter, was found in a Bronx park. He had been shot twice, in the head and chest. There would be no one to pay the ransom now.
It was widely assumed that Richard's death was connected to the kidnapping and probably the result of a ransom payment gone bad. However, it was noted early on that when his body was discovered, his wallet contained over $2,000 in U.S. currency. His jewelry was there. Apparently, his automobile was nearby. So there was some question about what the actual motivations were behind his murder.
We got a little boy's missing fingers.
With Richard Porter's death, investigators lost their closest connection to the abducted 12-year-old. To find another source, they increased pressure on lower-level dealers in Porter's organization.
Where'd this come from?
Facing drug charges, they were offered leniency in exchange for information. Some said Porter's partner, Alpo Martinez, could be involved.
Playing us.
Others claimed an infamous Harlem gang called the Preacher Crew might be.
Come on, I
But
need a
none
name,
offered
man.
direct leads to the crime. 3 weeks later, a boy's body was recovered in the same Bronx park where Richard Porter was found.
Donnell, Miss Porter. Be sure.
His family identified the body of Donnell Porter. Cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head.
Death of a child is always a disturbing event. There's a 12-year-old boy, he's on the way to public school. He's kidnapped, tortured. He's heard on the tape cassette crying for help from his family.
Donnell's murder stunned the entire Harlem community, even though violence was a daily occurrence there. At the time, Sergeant James Marr worked NYPD's notorious 32nd Precinct, where Donnell lived.
In the late 80s and the early 90s, the 32nd Precinct, which is actually geographically only 1 square mile, was one of the most violent precincts in New York City. They averaged in the area of the upper 60s to low 70s of homicides a year, and added on to that were shootings, several hundred shootings, that the people didn't die.
In response to the increased violence in the city, a task force called the C-11 Squad had been formed at the FBI's New York field office. Detectives from the 32nd Precinct and FBI agents were assigned to the squad.
C-11 was created to address these entrenched criminal conspiracy groups in the city of New York. The locals brought their knowledge of the streets, the knowledge of the subjects involved to the table. The federal agents brought along with them the access to the federal courts, which included the access to the federal sentencing guidelines in the United States Attorney's Office.
After the murder of Donnell Porter, they knew they had to take back the streets. C-11 would first go after Alpo Martinez, Richard Porter's partner.
The problem is here, we haven't
If their
identified the
partnership
other
had
members of the
unraveled,
crew yet.
he would have had the most to gain from extorting Richard Porter and killing him.
We're still working on some surveillance.
A year earlier, a warrant had been sworn out for his arrest on drug charges. But when Martinez couldn't be found, federal prosecutors had to drop the warrant. In police computers, the C-11 Squad flagged the names of known associates of Alpo Martinez. If any were arrested, they would be notified. Months later, police in Washington, D.C. pulled over a car after observing its driver engage in a drug deal. The driver was a known courier for Alpo Martinez. Police found a large amount of crack and thousands of dollars in his car. Noting the flag on his record from New York, D.C. authorities would contact the C-11 Squad. After the courier was sentenced to 20 years to life on drug charges, C-11 agents had him transported to New York for an interview.
I want some information because we want.
An agent explained that under federal law, his sentence could be reviewed if he cooperated with authorities.
You're just making this difficult on yourself. Where does he? All I know.
He told what he knew about Martinez and Porter's East Coast drug operation.
Drugs would be distributed both in New York City by Richard Porter and in Washington, D.C. by Alpo Martinez. While in Washington, D.C., Martinez allied himself with individuals that he found to be strong on the street, if you will, in order to protect his drug operation in Washington, D.C. And it was not unusual for literally sea bags worth of U.S. currency to be shipped out of Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C. up into the Porter neighborhood at 132nd and 7th Avenue in New York City.
It was enough for a renewed arrest warrant on Alpo Martinez. Agents canvassed the neighborhood, talking to people who knew Martinez. Most were afraid to talk. Eventually, agents learned the fugitive was going to pick up his wife's car at a dealership in northern New Jersey. Undercover agents staked out the dealership. They didn't know if Martinez would show up, but they knew he liked fast cars. That afternoon, a sports car pulled up. They watched a passenger get out, but it wasn't Martinez.
There he goes. He's going over to the building. I'm coming over. Still can't ID this.
Agents couldn't tell if the fugitive was driving.
Can you see him?
They had to risk a closer look. If they could arrest Martinez, it might help solve the murders of Richard Porter and his 12-year-old brother, Donnell. An agent visually identified Martinez as the driver. He radioed a go-ahead signal. But before the arrest team could respond, Martinez spun away. Agents gave chase, but the fugitive disappeared into heavy traffic. With Alpo Martinez still a fugitive, the abduction and murder of 12-year-old Donnell Porter remained unsolved. The abduction and murder of 12-year-old Donnell Porter showed that Harlem's drug violence was out of control. The FBI's C-11 squad knew the murder was connected to the boy's brother, crack dealer Richard Porter. But Porter himself had been killed. C-11 believed finding Porter's partner, Alpo Martinez, would provide answers. But in 1991, Martinez had eluded an FBI undercover operation. From the incident, the FBI got his license plate number and alerted New York police to be on the lookout for the vehicle. The next day, police spotted it, parked on a Harlem street. They impounded it, hoping it might lead to Martinez. They believed the fugitive wouldn't retrieve the vehicle himself, but FBI Special Agent David Higgins waited to see if he'd send someone.
A young lady showed up who claimed to be the true owner. She was the registered owner. Ultimately, a quick investigation established that she was what we call a straw man, or somebody who had stepped forward in order to buy and register the car on behalf of Mr. Martinez.
Martinez was nowhere to be found in New York. Acting on a tip that he had traveled to Washington, D.C., agents set up surveillance at the D.C. home of the fugitive's ex-wife. In the early hours of November 7th, 1991, they spotted Martinez getting into his ex-wife's vehicle. This time, he wasn't driving. As they pulled out, the FBI made their move. The fugitive's ex-wife pulled over. The cocaine in his possession helped cement the case against one of the biggest drug traffickers on the East Coast.
Ultimately, Mr. Martinez pled guilty to an indictment in the Eastern District of Virginia, which accused him of trafficking in over 1,000 kilograms of cocaine. The wholesale value of that would be $20 million.
Richie Rich, who killed him?
Investigators also had evidence against Martinez on several gangland murders.
The little boy? Yeah. I don't know nothing about that.
They told him they knew he was Richard Porter's partner, so he stood to gain from Donnell's and Richard's death. Hoping to avoid the death penalty, Alpo Martinez agreed to cooperate.
What happened? I picked him up.
He admitted killing his partner, Richard Porter.
Just like we always do on the weekend or whatever. It didn't seem like
Martinez had begun to suspect his partner had been cheating him out of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
So then from there,
He said that more than a year earlier, on January 4th, 1990, he and an associate had taken Richard Porter for a ride. Almost immediately, Martinez and the associate each shot him. They dumped his body in the Bronx Park, where it was found the next day. Martinez swore it was just about missing drug money. It had nothing to do with Donnell Porter's kidnapping and murder. No evidence or testimony linked Martinez to that crime. He went to prison for life. Although they had put away a major drug dealer, the local and federal investigators of the C-11 squad were no closer to solving the murder of Donnell Porter. They reviewed FBI intelligence already gathered on other Harlem gangsters who might have profited from extorting and killing Richard Porter.
Porter's known as Richie Rich. We've got a couple of characters.
One gang stood out as likely suspects.
Identified their unique.
They were known as the Preacher Crew. The gang's leader was Clarence Preacher Heatley. FBI Special Agent Joe Walsh, formerly of the C-11 squad, knew the Preacher and his crew were well entrenched and very dangerous.
Preacher crew was the established crew in the neighborhood, for a long time. Preacher had been kicking around the streets of Harlem since the early 70s, and everybody knew him by his nickname, the Black Hand of Death, and everybody was deathly afraid of him.
NYPD Sergeant James Marr of the C-11 squad learned the Preacher had a reputation for violence. But the gangster was an elusive figure in Harlem.
You could walk up to anybody in the 32nd precinct, no matter how church-going they are, no matter whether they're businessmen or local drug dealers, they all have a Preacher story. They all know who Preacher is. Ask any of them to describe Preacher to you, or a majority of them, they're not going to be able to. Because this guy was an infamous legend in Harlem.
The players in Harlem's drug underworld had carved up the area into zones. Each block, each alley was the established turf of a single dealer. Most dealers respected the boundaries. But the Preacher did not. He considered all of Harlem his turf. He made his money not by dealing drugs, but by taxing other dealers.
But he was mostly into extortion, extorting drug dealers. These are guys that were violent in their own right. He would go up and claim their car. If a drug dealer looked like he was getting paid, so to say, he was driving a brand new full-size Mercedes-Benz, and Preacher liked that car, that was Preacher's.
Those who argued with Preacher paid a heavy price. It was a system that made him a rich man.
If you're hitting every other drug dealer on the streets, 2,000 here, 3,000 here, 5,000 there, that's a lot of money. It adds up. And believe me, they all paid, because if they didn't pay, Preacher would pay him a visit, or he would order his people to pay him a visit, and they'd wind up dead.
We took him in last week.
The Preacher's history of extortion and violence made him a likely suspect in the abduction and murder of Donnell Porter.
John Cuff.
C-11 had outlined the basic structure of the Preacher crew.
Including some of his other main guys in his crew.
The Preacher's main lieutenant was a man named John Cuff. He was a particularly dangerous criminal, according to C-11's detective Vinnie Flynn.
John Cuff was an ex-New York City housing cop. As a cop, he provided protection and bodyguard work for Preacher. So if they were driving through the neighborhood and were stopped, John Cuff had a shield where he would probably be let go and not given a summons or anything further would happen. John Cuff had a reputation of one to be feared, very violent person.
Yet no evidence linked either man to Donnell Porter. Though C-11 suspected Preacher was involved in the deadly kidnapping, he probably didn't commit it himself. He distanced himself from most of the crimes, having his main lieutenant and other henchmen carry out his orders.
I know you got so much. I know you got so much, man.
At Preacher's command, their brutal extortion tactics earned them money and kept witnesses too intimidated to talk, effectively insulating the crew against investigation.
We go into a bodega or someplace up in Holland, and we'd say, we know he came in here, and the guy would have a cast on his hand. We know he broke your hand, and the shop owner would say, I don't know what you're talking about, and that shop owner would be paying rent, or tax to Preacher, but nobody would tell us anything.
With people too afraid to talk, crimes continued to pile up. On New Year's Eve, 1992, emergency units responded to a call in the Preacher's territory. A man lay dead in his car, the victim of a drive-by shooting. His family survived the harrowing ordeal. They described how the killers pulled up next to them on the street and opened fire. They claimed they didn't know who did it or why. And like Donnell's kidnapping, no one in the neighborhood admitted seeing anything. It was another tragic killing in Harlem that might go unsolved. The C-11 squad had to breach the area's violently enforced code of silence and finally get insiders to talk. A shocking drive-by shooting was added to the list of unsolved murders in Harlem. With witnesses too afraid to cooperate with police, the case was open for 2 years. Then in 1994, the C-11 squad found a witness who told them the shooter was a Preacher crew member named Malik. Detective Vinnie Flynn learned that Malik had a violent reputation.
He became a so-called director of security for the Preacher organization. He was in charge of the group of members who were known as the janitors. The janitors were the people that had to clean up the problems or the mess of the family. And you couldn't be a janitor unless you killed somebody.
To get more on Malik and the Preacher crew, C-11 tried to send in undercover officers. It was yet another dead end, according to FBI Special Agent Joe Walsh.
We weren't able to really get in, so to speak, and get an undercover in there to buy narcotics from Preacher, because Preacher was very, very careful. He was, he's a very smart man, and we couldn't get the undercover, close to him.
The Preacher had closed ranks, ordering the people he extorted not to sell to new buyers and to keep a low profile on the street. Investigators needed a witness with close ties to the crew. They distributed business cards, hoping one would find its way to an insider willing to talk. Their persistence paid off. In April 1994, a crew member contacted the C-11 squad because he realized his life was in danger. He said the preacher had started going after his own crew members. Preacher had killed 2 of the informant's partners. Fearing he was next, he asked Sergeant James Marr for protection.
It was a stone-cold killer himself who became an informant that was so fearful of Preacher and of being killed like his partners had that he came to me, that he came to us, that he gave us information on specific crimes, that he talked about crimes that had been unsolved for years.
Investigators were frustrated that the informant knew nothing of 12-year-old Donnell Porter's kidnapping and murder. But he did give investigators their first specific insider information about Preacher Heatley's organization. He mentioned a killing basement that the crew used as a meeting place and execution chamber. At some meetings, Preacher would call for a vote on the fate of gang members who had fallen out of favor. If the majority voted thumbs down, Preacher ordered a murder. In March 1994, Preacher called for a vote on Malik, the janitor who had done the drive-by shooting. He believed Malik could no longer be trusted. The vote was thumbs down.
Yeah, what's up?
Preacher summoned Malik to headquarters.
How y'all doing? All right, most love, man. Most love, man. Most love. How you doing? I ain't seen you in a long time. What you been at, man? Most love. Know it, man. How it is?
Malik thought he was there to take part in the beating of a crew member that he had had problems with in the past.
Jay, I know he's slinging, man. All right, word.
Not realizing he was the real target, Malik was excited when others invited him to the basement.
If you went down there and you were followed in there, you know, somebody was behind you, you weren't coming out alive.
Yo, son, let's go get this dude, son. Let's go get him. We're gonna do this to you, man. Real, yo. Do this to you. Yo, oh, shit. Priest, what's up, man? What's up, man? What's up? Yo, what you doing? Oh, man. Yo, Preacher, man, come on, man.
Preacher told Malik he had to die. He was gaining too much influence within the organization. Preacher wouldn't tolerate it. Malik pleaded for his life. But the order had been given.
Grab the saw, son. Clean him up.
At Preacher's command, other janitors used a circular saw to dismember Malik. The informant said that Preacher ordered him and another crew member to dispose of the body parts.
This is the guy you work for, right?
They poured acid on Malik's arms to remove gang tattoos that could link him to the crew. Then they left the body parts in several crumbling, abandoned buildings.
They kept Malik's head in a refrigerator for a couple of weeks, and they kind of paraded it around on a stick. You know, that's how Preacher would, you know, keep the fear of God, so to speak, in the younger Turks in his organization.
The fear was too much for the informant, though he knew leaving the crew was equivalent to a death sentence. He hoped the C-11 squad could protect him. It didn't take long for word to get back to the Preacher that the informant had cooperated. One day, the informant was leaving a New York courthouse when he spotted Preacher in cuff. He was sure they were there to abduct and kill him. He went to his car and called his C-11 handlers.
The informant advised me that his fear that he was going to be killed by the organization, he was going to be abducted, right in the middle of the afternoon in front of the courthouse.
The agents of C-11 rushed to stop another murder in the preacher's territory.
I'm scared to death.
A former member of the preacher crew feared the gang was out to kill him for cooperating with authorities. Agents and detectives from the FBI C-11 squad came to his aid just in time. They arrested Maine Lieutenant John Cuff and the crew leader himself, Clarence Preacher Heatley. Sergeant James Marr and the other arresting agents searched the vehicle.
There was evidence inside, including information about my informant, masks, tape. It was apparent at the time that my informant's feelings were right. He was going to be abducted that day.
Come on, man.
But no one could prove that the men were coming to kill the informant.
20 minutes is all it took. I told you.
The preacher and Cuff were released.
Come on, man. I got things to do, man. Hurry up.
The incident brought the C-11 squad's investigation of the crew into the open.
20 minutes all it took.
Have a nice day.
Nice day, officer.
That's when it became apparent that they were being investigated by the FBI. I mean, here's this detective that they know from the 3-2, that when he does make an arrest, makes arrests with FBI agents. It became apparent to Cuff and Preacher that the FBI was breathing down their neck.
Preacher further insulated himself. The FBI would have to get him by going after his organization. To prosecute, they would use federal racketeering statutes known as RICO. Originally designed to bring down organized crime families, RICO requires that strict criteria are met, according to FBI Special Agent Joe Walsh.
You have to have your organization. You have to have your leader, which in this case was Preacher, and he has to have 5 or more people working underneath him, you know, to facilitate the conspiracy of the organization. But you also need 3 predicate offenses, 3 federal offenses.
The C-11 investigators surveilled the Preacher crew, gathering evidence on offenses to support the RICO case. They noticed unrest within the gang. It seemed the pressure of C-11's investigation was getting to the Preacher. From an informant, agents learned he even ordered the murder of his Maine lieutenant, John Cuff. Agents were obligated to warn Cuff of the hit.
I reached for my shield. He goes, "I know who you are. You don't have to show me your shield." I said, "You know, John, I just wanted to let you know that there's a contract out in your life, and I swear there's nothing but space when you look in his eyes." And he goes, "Everybody wants me dead."
Coming in, man. Come on, man.
Cuff was undaunted by the threat. Though the Preacher was tightening his grip on his men, investigators still needed to get evidence of the crimes the crew committed to support the racketeering organization. As more buyers and sellers were arrested, some agreed to cooperate, helping to outline the group in detail, according to Detective Vinnie Flynn.
We obtained informants through narcotics investigations, arrests made by the 3-2 precinct and the 3-2 detective squad, through information they developed and informants they developed. Because of arrest, information was compiled, which built a case against the Preacher crew.
About some murders. What murders do you know about?
Unfortunately, no one had information on the Donnell Porter murder.
There was this girl who went to the park, you know, and so we took her back.
But one arrested crew member offered details of another murder committed by the crew, hoping for leniency. He said they decided they didn't want to pay for a shipment of drugs. They told the supplier that a young woman had stolen them and that they would take care of her. She was a single mother who sometimes worked as a courier for the crew.
So, did you see when we whacked that?
They brought her to a Harlem apartment, telling her they wanted her to hear a record they had produced.
Look it up.
She hadn't stolen any drugs. That didn't matter to the crew. The informant explained how they cleaned up the crime scene, then dumped the body in an abandoned building. He couldn't remember exactly which building it was. In August 1996, after more than 5 years of meticulous investigation, the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Southern District of New York decided they had enough for indictments and arrests on federal RICO charges. The first indictment was against Clarence Preacher Heatley and John Cuff. The indictment was kept sealed. If word got out to the preacher, he might disappear forever. Investigators staked out Preacher's Harlem headquarters. They hoped news of the indictments hadn't been leaked, and that if they found him, they could arrest him without a fight. They knew Preacher was surrounded by armed men, willing to kill at his command. In late 1996, the C-11 squad was ready to arrest Clarence Preacher Heatley. No one had seen him in days. On August 12th, he emerged from his headquarters building. Detectives made sure he was alone, then moved in.
Preacher, drop the phone! Drop the phone! Drop the phone! Let me see your hand! Get on the car! Get on the car! Get on the car!
As he was arrested, the elusive gang leader remained relaxed and confident. As soon as he was in custody, other teams arrested his main lieutenant, John Cuff. 2 months later, 15 more Preacher crew members were indicted. Arrest teams prepared for simultaneous takedowns. They had to strike fast, full force, to arrest gang members safely. Detective Vinnie Flynn and other C-11 investigators developed more cooperating witnesses among the arrested crew members.
Once people were arrested and being prosecuted, they agreed to cooperate, and they felt that they were used by the Preacher crew, and felt that if, in some cases, if they didn't participate, they would have been killed too. So this was their way out of the Preacher crew and from under Clarence Heatley's control.
Investigators learned in which Harlem buildings the crew dumped some of their victims. Finding physical evidence was crucial in order to prosecute the RICO case. One building was a shell, partially collapsed on the inside, further complicating the retrieval. After days of excavating tons of rubble, a body was discovered. Lab examiners determined it was the body of the young mother who had been killed as a cover for stolen drugs. She had been shot in an apartment in an adjacent building. Evidence response teams checked the apartment.
That's the apartment where they kept Malik's head. And in the refrigerator, there was a lot of blood still left in the apartment. And inside the refrigerator, there was Malik's blood from where they kept his head. They were able to trace that at the lab.
Malik and several others had been killed in the basement of the Preacher's headquarters. Crime scene technicians processed the basement. Arrested crew members said Preacher had them scrub the place with boric acid after each killing. Most of the basement was clean.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there you go, right there.
But technicians were able to recover traces of blood on the windows and on the saw blade that had been used to dismember Malik. But the investigation was not over. The abduction and murder of young Donnell Porter was still unsolved.
Come on in, gentlemen. Have a seat.
Answers about his death finally came from an unlikely source. An assistant district attorney convinced the boy's uncle, preacher crew member John Apple Porter, to come in to talk. He was one of the crew's main players left on the street and had been labeled a snitch. 2 attempts had been made on his life. The DA suggested that Porter cooperate to earn protection in prison. He confessed to several murders and revealed what happened to his nephew Donnell. According to Sergeant James Marr, the kidnapping was prompted by jealousy and greed.
The underlying factor with Johnny Porter, Johnny Apples, with the kidnapping was when he came home from prison, Richie Porter, his nephew, was this big Harlem drug dealer. He was getting paid. Richie Porter used to wear a lot of gold, used to really like flashy cars. He was making a lot of money, and he wasn't giving any to Johnny Porter. And Johnny Porter felt he was owed this, and he decided to take it. And the way he took it is he snatched the kid.
Porter said the preacher agreed to the kidnapping. He sent one of his janitors, Malik, to help. They believed Richard Porter would pay anything to get his brother back.
No.
They kept the boy in a basement where no one would hear him.
What's up, Sean? Gonna make a tape for us.
They cut off his finger and recorded the boy's pleas for help to prove to his family they were serious. Apple and Preacher hoped for $500,000, enough to set Apple up in his own drug trade and enough to cripple Richard Porter.
What time was it?
When Richard couldn't come up with that amount of cash, they lowered it to $350,000.
Did you hold that in his hand?
Then the unexpected happened. Preacher and Apple learned that Richard Porter was murdered. There'd be no ransom.
You sure about that?
Make the call.
Preacher Heatley later told Special Agent Joe Walsh about his decision.
Preacher sat right down in a room and told me exactly what happened. He looked me right in the eye and said, I couldn't let that boy live after what had happened.
Yeah.
John Porter insisted that it was Malik who actually did the killing. Malik was later killed and dismembered at the preacher's command.
You wanna think twice about it.
John Porter was sentenced to natural life. Because of the evidence collected by the C-11 squad, each member of the preacher crew went to prison. Their leader, Clarence Preacher Heatley, pled guilty to federal racketeering charges that included drug trafficking, assault, and murder. He was sentenced to life with no chance of parole. He and his crew will never again terrorize the streets of Harlem.
It's estimated that they're responsible for approximately 45 murders that we're aware of. Numerous robberies. If you add the extortion in, these people were a decade-long or better crime wave in themselves. They were just amazing, the devastation that they caused in these communities.
That changed when the C-11 squad dismantled the preacher crew forever. Since the case was closed, Harlem has seen a rebirth.
Harlem today, the 32nd precinct, is running somewhere between 15 and 20 homicides a year, down from the 70s. down from 70 a year in the late 80s during the crack cocaine binge. I think we accomplished quite a bit with this case. And the drug organization doesn't exist anymore, so we can't hurt anybody else.
Early in the 1980s, a charismatic leader arose in Miami.
Why art thou so far?
He drew the weak, the poor, and the powerless to his side. He promised them a better life, but they had to follow his commands to earn it. His temples soon sprouted across the country as thousands were drawn to his gospel. And those who questioned his doctrine started turning up dead. Local police and the FBI had to stop him.
In Miami, the discovery of a mutilated body sent investigators on the trail of a deadly cult. But agents found a wall of silence around the cult's members. Potential witnesses, terrified of reprisals, refused to talk. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. It would take a massive operation involving 120 agents in 7 cities to bring down a deranged fanatic who believed he was God.
Friday, November 13th, 1981, Miami, Florida. On the outskirts of the city, a construction foreman was checking his work site. On a dirt road, he came upon something wrapped in blankets. It was a body. He called police. Detectives from Miami-Dade responded. The foreman said he hadn't seen the body when he passed by earlier that morning.
What's happening? Got a problem here.
The body must have been laid there recently.
What? No head. Not yet.
The detectives inspected the remains. It was an African-American male. He had been decapitated. Detectives found only a set of keys on the victim. There was no wallet or identification.
No? I'm just...
4 feet away, detectives found the victim's head wrapped in sheets.
How far do you think it's worth?
His fingerprints were taken in the hopes that they might help identify the man. Decapitations are rare, usually performed to hide a murder victim's identity. According to Detective John King, that wasn't the motive here.
There was no attempt to hide or prevent identification because they left the head actually on the scene. Usually, if you're going to try to prevent an identification from being made, you would take other body parts, such as the hands or the head also. It seems like it was more ritualistic than anything else, how he was killed.
The victim's face was badly damaged. Visual identification would be difficult. And unless the man's fingerprints were on record, investigators would have no way of identifying him from his prints. Perhaps the autopsy could tell them more. The medical examiner determined that the victim had been severely beaten before his decapitation. His nose was bloodied, his teeth were broken, and his eyes were swollen shut. His wrists showed ligature marks, and sneaker tread marks on his body suggested he'd been kicked. On the back of his neck, the medical examiner found evidence of repeated blows from a dull blade. It had been a large weapon, perhaps a machete. Comparing the victim's fingerprints wouldn't be easy. In 1981, the database wasn't computerized. Features of the print had to be compared manually against thousands in arrest files. Eventually, one investigator hit the mark. The victim's name was Aston Green, age 25. He had been arrested a month earlier for a misdemeanor driving charge in Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, we got a match.
They found no history of violent crime.
510.
Detectives went to Aston Green's last known address, his mother's house.
My son?
Yes, ma'am. Can you maybe help us out by telling us when
After informing Mrs. Green of her son's death, detectives asked her about Aston. She said her son had recently turned to religion. He seemed very serious about it. She'd last seen him 2 weeks earlier. She'd prepared a vegetarian meal for him in accordance with his new religious beliefs.
So tell me what's going on with you? What are you doing?
They talked about his conversion. He explained he was a Hebrew Israelite, a Yahweh. She told investigators that his son was committed to his Yahweh beliefs.
That's when we first heard the word Yahweh. I had no idea what the Yahweh was all about. I never heard the name before, I knew nothing about them.
Aston Green's mother didn't know his new address, though she did have a phone number.
This is the number that he gave me the last time I saw him.
She said he had a housemate but didn't know his name. From the phone number, detectives determined Green's new address, about 12 miles from downtown Miami. Due to the violent nature of the murder, they called for backup before approaching the house. No one answered.
Dade County Police, open up!
Perhaps Green's housemate had been harmed too. Detectives decided to enter the house. The key they found in Green's pocket fit the lock.
Dade County Police!
We entered the house thinking that hopefully we wouldn't find any other bodies, but we went in to check it out. We found a number of items of a religious nature, textbooks, workbooks, a lot of literature. It turned out that it was from the Hebrew Israelite religion.
There was no sign of the housemate.
We also found a machete that was tucked to the side of one of the sofas in the residence. We immediately became interested in the machete because that could be a weapon to decapitate somebody.
The machete appeared to be clean. Investigators continued their search. By the door, they found a phone number. They traced it to a house 2 miles away.
Hi, I'm Detective Christopher. This is Detective King. Can we talk to you for a few minutes?
At the house, the detectives talked with a group of Hebrew Israelites.
I'm sorry to have to inform you, but
Among them was Aston Green's housemate, Carlton Carey. All of them knew Green through the Yahweh Temple. They told investigators that Green, like themselves, had grown disillusioned with the rigid social doctrine of the temple.
can you tell me something about
I seen him in the temple, but I don't know.
To them, adherence to the temple's leader was at too high a price.
And we're just trying to get as much information.
Their colored turbans signified their desire to break away from it.
It makes this much easier on us.
We spoke to them briefly. We got a little bit of background information on the temple and what it was all about, and we asked them to respond to the homicide office so that we could take statements and in-depth interviews with them about what happened and what they knew.
Several suggested that the killers were probably zealous members of the Yahweh Temple who wanted to silence those who questioned the doctrine. Most were afraid to say more, especially to police. They were already branded dissenters. They feared any further disobedience could be punished by death.
Well, all the people that we spoke to perceived a great deal of danger because of threats that had been made to them, both on the phone and by word of mouth from other members that were still in the organization. They were concerned for their safety, and the death of Aston Green certainly confirmed this.
The next day, Green's housemates came to the police station to talk. Despite the threat, Carlton Carey and his wife wanted to help. His wife was interviewed in a separate room at the station. Carey said that he and Green had embraced the temple until recently, when its leader, Hulon Mitchell, started calling himself the true Messiah. The charismatic leader of the temple, Hulon Mitchell, believed that blacks were descended from the lost Hebrew tribe of Judah. As followers of Mitchell, members abandoned their given names. They took a biblical first name and adopted the last name of Israel. Mitchell did not allow dissent among his followers. Mitchell eventually changed his name to Yahweh ben Yahweh, which means God, Son of God.
In fact, during the interview we had with him, he referred to Hulon as not the Messiah, but a crook and a swindler, which was his characterization of Hulon Mitchell at that time.
Carey still had reservations about talking to police. Detectives offered to escort him home.
Gentlemen, a ride home?
Fine.
All right.
He declined, opting to leave with his wife alone.
When they left the homicide office that night, they didn't want to be escorted because any police being with them would be further attraction to anybody that saw them, and they were concerned about being seen with anybody. They didn't want us to escort them home.
Carey and his wife took a winding route home to make sure no one had followed them. They never suspected someone to be waiting inside. As Miami police investigated the beheading of a dissident member of a religious group, 2 informants were ambushed in their home. Carlton Carey had been shot to death. His wife, Mildred Banks, had also been shot, and her throat was slashed. She barely clung to life. Like the beheading victim, the 2 were dissident members of the Hebrew Israelites. At the scene, police found a bloodied machete. Detective John King believed a similar weapon had been used in the earlier beheading.
The fact that a machete was actually used in an attempt on Mildred's life certainly give more credence to the belief that the Hebrew Israelites were involved in it.
Detectives learned that many members of the Hebrew Israelite movement owned machetes. Police searched the house. Nothing found at the scene indicated who was responsible for the assault. Whoever the killers were, they had cut the phone line and left no physical trace of themselves behind. Detectives' only hope was Mildred Banks. If doctors could save her, perhaps she could name her attackers.
Mildred was very seriously injured as a result of the attack on her. She was shot in the chest, the bullet was still in her, and she had a deep gash to the left side of her neck. She was given a very low probability of surviving those injuries.
Police waited several days to see if she would survive surgery. Without her description of events, investigators had little hope of solving the case. Mildred Banks pulled through. When she was conscious, investigators visited her in the recovery room. Though critically wounded, she was able to answer questions from the police. She said that she and her husband had driven by their house several times to be sure no one had followed them. They saw no one, so they went inside. She was certain that her attackers were Yahweh's, sent because they had spoken to police that day. She never saw their faces.
We were concerned that they may actually make an attempt on her at the hospital, so we posted 2 police officers at all times with her throughout her stay at the hospital. They were there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for approximately 1 month.
The message of this most recent attack was clear to dissenting members of the Yahweh Temple. Those who spoke out or cooperated with police would suffer reprisals.
After the homicide of Carlton Carey, we were not able to locate any of the former members that had split from the temple. They had fled in different directions. They became scared and they just left.
Detective King needed to learn more about the Yahweh organization. He and his partner visited its Miami temple.
We tried interviewing people and we really got nowhere. Every time we spoke to somebody, it was praise Yahweh or, see the public information office at the temple.
Through a spokesperson, Hulon Mitchell, the Yahweh leader, claimed to know nothing about the murders and offered no help. Suspecting he knew more, investigators began surveillance on the Yahweh enterprise.
The surveillance was sort of a constant rolling type surveillance where you drive by, write down some tag numbers, but to actually set off and watch the place, it was impossible because at all times there were guards standing outside the temple watching the front door.
Detectives did learn that the Yahweh organization was extensive. In Florida and in 13 other states, the Yahwehs owned real estate, buses, and vehicles that the leader claimed totaled nearly $50 million. Some said membership topped 12,000 in Florida alone.
Most of these people are hard-working professionals that really didn't believe in a lot of what Hulon Mitchell was teaching. Certainly they were not racist to the level that he was, and they were not believing much of what he was telling them about him being the Messiah. They did, however, believe much of what the religion itself taught, surrounding Judaism and the Muslim religion.
Since the Yahweh organization spanned several states, the FBI began investigating. Supervisory Special Agent Herbert Cousins was assigned as case agent. He believed the organization demonstrated elements of domestic terrorism.
Domestic terrorism investigations are conducted in a group of individuals who engage in criminal activities to further their social or political goal.
Local and federal investigators looked deeper into the organization.
art thou so far from helping me?
Hulan Mitchell invited the homeless, the destitute, and the ex-con to join his Hebrew Israelites.
Thine anger. The Lord shall swallow them up. The request of his
People
lips
with no job or family found a place to belong, receiving food, shelter, and employment.
for the Son, which
This
is as a
kindness
bridegroom
didn't
coming
reflect
out
Mitchell's
of the
underlying
chamber
mission.
from the earth. And their seed
He taught that blacks, as the true Jewish people, had a crucial role.
they intended evil against thee.
He told his followers that their duty was to bring about heaven on earth by destroying the white oppressors. To his most avid followers, Yahweh ben Yahweh was the Messiah, and everything they had belonged to him, including their labor.
Their words to the end of the world.
To raise revenue, the Yahwehs manufactured and packaged their own hair care products, tonics, beverages, t-shirts, wine, and more. The merchandise was shipped to his network of temples all over the country. Yahweh required his members to reach certain income goals for their temple by selling these wares. In turn, the temple fed and sheltered them, and even educated their children. Despite the allegations of violence and his thinly veiled message of hate, Mitchell's temple continued to prosper and spread. According to Assistant U.S. Attorney Richard Scruggs, the general public was unclear about Mitchell's true intentions.
The Yahwehs in the early 80s had been amassing power and property, and they had a kind of a dual reputation. People saw them as a somewhat scary group that they knew were preaching hatred and violence, but at the same time, they outwardly appeared to be quiet, well-behaved, mannered, and they would go in and buy these properties in distressed neighborhoods and actually clean them up.
Not everyone welcomed their presence in the neighborhood. In May 1986, people in Delray, Florida, drove them out. At around 2 a.m. the same night, the neighborhood was firebombed. The fire destroyed the entire block and injured 1 adult and 3 children, including a 9-month-old infant. Police suspected Yahweh members were responsible. One officer recalled an incident that happened in the area about an hour before the bombing. While cruising the neighborhood, he spotted some men dressed in black standing near a van. The area reeked of gasoline. The men seemed suspicious, but they weren't doing anything illegal. They claimed they were having engine trouble. He took down the license plate number and left. Police determined that the van was registered to an elder at the Yahweh Temple. Hulan Mitchell denied any involvement in the firebombing attack. One of his followers was more cooperative.
We were able to develop an informant who actually walked into the FBI, who provided information regarding the group.
The informant confirmed investigators' suspicions that Mitchell's henchmen were responsible for the firebombing. But he had no direct evidence. He then gave agents information about another crime. He confessed that he had participated in the slaying of Aston Green, the man found beheaded on a dirt road. He said that the dead man had been considered a threat since he openly questioned Hulan Mitchell's authority. Green was abducted from the temple and severely beaten.
All right, head back to the van. Get back to the second.
The informant drove him there, and another member carried out Mitchell's order to behead him.
All right, let's go, let's go! Get out of here, let's go!
Why should we believe? The information was crucial but limited. investigators still had no physical evidence tying Hulan Mitchell to Green's murder. Authorities would have to carefully build trust among the ex-members. Detective John King re-interviewed Mildred Banks, the woman who had been ambushed in her home.
In following up from the information with Woodside, I made contact with Mildred Banks, and she turned me on to an individual that was a former member of the organization that might be able to assist me. I subsequently made contact with that person, who took me around to a number of locations where former members resided.
As investigators continued their search for a witness courageous enough to come forward, Miami police received more disturbing news. A murder victim was found in his car with both ears cut off. Police wondered if this ritualistic killing could be related to the machete attacks. In September of 1986, as FBI and Miami police investigated the leader of the Yahwehs, Hulan Mitchell, police responded to another bizarre murder. 61-year-old Raymond Kelly was found stabbed to death in his vehicle. Both ears had been severed. One was recovered at the scene. Police believed the killer took the other. Metro-Dade Homicide Lieutenant Rex Remley's squad worked the case.
In the Dade County area, we had experienced a number of cases in which victims had been murdered and there was an ear missing. In several of those cases, it appeared that it may be the same perpetrator that had committed the crime.
To investigators, it looked as if Kelly had been drinking just prior to his death. Detectives collected several sets of prints from the vehicle. But what investigators found missing from the car held greater importance. According to the victim's wife, he always kept a .38 revolver in his glove compartment. Now it was gone. The gun's serial number was entered into the National Crime Information Computer. If the gun turned up anywhere in the country, Miami-Dade police would be notified. Weeks later, police in Opelika, a suburb of Miami, responded to emergency calls from residents of an apartment complex.
It was an apartment complex that had recently been taken under siege, for lack of a better term, by the Yahwehs.
Tenants who lived there called it the Dirt Road Apartments. A low-income housing project, some local residents considered it an eyesore. Many were delighted when the Yahweh leader Hulan Mitchell bought the property. Dirt Road residents were not.
Unfortunately for the residents, their idea of taking the building over was to actually move the residents out, and sometimes, according to the residents, that was by force, where the Yahwehs would actually come into their apartments and remove furniture and belongings, while the people objected but had no real way to stop these individuals.
The Yahweh's strong-arm eviction efforts made the TV news. One resident, Anthony Brown, was particularly outspoken.
I'm gonna stay here until I get eviction notice. I don't care what they say. I do, because they ain't going in. Just simple as that.
He cursed the Yahweh's leader, Hulan Mitchell.
Stand around and look.
Investigators knew that Mitchell didn't tolerate public criticism.
Yahweh.
Witnesses told police that tensions at the apartments continued after night fell. That evening, violence erupted and 2 men were killed. Police responded to the double murder. They chased one of two suspects in the shooting.
Get your hands up!
A canine unit tracked down the man. The suspect carried nothing in his pockets except 2 bullets.
We got the bullets out of his left pocket.
Nearby, police recovered a .38 caliber revolver. It was not the murder weapon. Police cross-checked its serial number in the crime computer but found no match.
Your room right here. Just keep an eye on you for this.
The suspect was arrested and taken to the Opelika police station. Metro Dade Lieutenant Rex Remley interviewed him there.
I was just trying to get his basic information. Was that he had told me that he was Nehemiah Israel, and when I asked him about his age, he told me that he was over 400 years old. So that's the type of individual that I was dealing with.
The name he gave was a Yahweh name, and police found Yahweh clothing in the car he had used to flee. Police suspected that he had been sent to silence those who had spoken out against the Yahwehs. A fingerprint match revealed that the suspect's real name was Robert Rozier. He had spent time in prison for burglary and car theft. Lieutenant Remley also learned that he was a former football player in the National Football League.
He then began to have problems after he had left his football career. He had a history that went from crimes in Maryland to crimes in San Francisco area to crimes in Dade County. So he had an extensive past.
Rozier's arrest marked the first time an active member of Hulon Mitchell's group was caught at a crime scene. Though they could only charge Rozier with loitering and prowling, authorities suspected he was guilty of much more. Miami police looked for more information from residents who lived nearby the complex. Most residents were reluctant, but several came forward.
We were able to determine that Mr. Rozier had in fact been involved in chasing Mr. Brown across the field. He was present, it was our feeling, when the shots were fired where Mr. Brown was killed, and that he had also attempted to flee from the scene. He was charged that morning with the murder of Mr. Brown.
Lieutenant Remley still wondered about the handgun found at the time of Rozier's arrest. It was a .38 revolver, the same type missing from the car of murder victim Raymond Kelly. Though a computer check failed to match the guns, Lieutenant Remley pulled Raymond Kelly's file just to be sure.
There had to be more of a story to this gun. And I finally found the documents that had been provided by the family that showed the serial number of this gun. When I checked it, I was amazed to see that it was the exact same gun that we had impounded at Opelika that night. Unfortunately, when the gun had been entered into the computer, one of the digits had been displaced in some way, and therefore when we ran the gun found at the scene of the murder in Opelika, it did not show as being Raymond Kelly's stolen weapon.
Robert Rozier was now connected to the murder of Raymond Kelly. Prints lifted from Kelly's vehicle matched Rozier's. His fingerprint was found at another slashed-ear murder as well. Investigators had enough evidence to charge him with 2 slashed-ear murders and the double murder at the Dirt Road Apartments. Rozier found himself facing 4 first-degree murder charges, and very likely, the death penalty. As Miami investigators tried to close in on Yahweh leader Hulon Mitchell, they arrested a man suspected of being one of Mitchell's enforcers. Robert Rozier sat behind bars facing 4 capital murder charges. Investigators hoped Rozier would turn on the leader. The Yahwehs and their organization became the target of public scrutiny. Hulan Mitchell, their leader, refused to meet the press. He stayed hidden behind his followers, who passed out pamphlets explaining that Rozier had been framed. The bad publicity could destroy all that Mitchell had built. He hired a high-priced attorney and public relations expert. It was Mitchell's first step in creating a new image for his organization.
Quickly as possible.
What the hell do you want? I'm here to help you.
Mitchell offered the attorney's legal help to Rozier.
Make this mess go away.
Rozier quickly realized that the attorney was there to protect the interests of Hulan Mitchell, not Rozier's.
Just talk to me.
But Rozier still refused to turn on the leader of the Yahwehs.
Robot.
Lieutenant Rex Remley recalls that the media attention prompted other insiders to talk.
The media brought out different stories about people that had been inside the organization who wanted to speak about what had occurred. And it also brought other people to law enforcement who, for maybe the first time, realized that there was a significant reason at this point that people were being killed, and it was time to come forward and tell what you knew.
Investigators got a call from Oklahoma. One of Hulan Mitchell's relatives wanted to talk. She told them she'd witnessed a martial arts expert from New Orleans beaten to death by Yahwehs in 1983. She said Mitchell had ordered the beating. The young man's name was Leonard Dupree. Dupree was killed because Hulan Mitchell believed the man had been disrespectful.
He changed his name.
Detectives tracked down Dupree's mother in New Orleans.
Hello, my name is Rex Remley.
She confirmed that Leonard was a martial arts expert and had left home in 1983 to join the Yahwehs. But without a body or other evidence, investigators couldn't arrest Mitchell. While investigators were learning about Hulan Mitchell's dark secrets, he was opening his temple to the public.
Water coolers down the hall. Okay. And you're off.
To improve its image, Mitchell encouraged the most avid followers to take work in the community at large. But one avid member was beginning to change his mind about the leader he had followed so closely. For weeks, Robert Rozier sat behind bars, watching Hulan Mitchell distance himself further and further from the murder suspect. Then, in June of 1987, Mitchell formally excommunicated Robert Rozier on live TV. With the symbolic stroke of a marker, Mitchell had separated himself from Rozier permanently. Rozier had no one left to protect but himself. He decided to begin working with the FBI. It was the break agents were hoping for. Just after his transfer to federal prison, Rozier told investigators that he knew of at least 20 murders across the country that had been ordered by the Yahweh leader Hulan Mitchell. To agents, it was clear that Mitchell hid behind organized religion as a front for organized crime.
Why?
Rozier also explained why he and another man killed Anthony Brown and Rudy Broussard at the apartments in Opelika. For Special Agent Herbert Cousins, it confirmed what he already suspected.
Brown and Broussard were executed. That's pretty much what happened. They resisted being evicted from their homes, and they spoke out on TV against the Yahwehs, and we were told that was the reason why they were murdered.
Rozier also confessed to the murder of Raymond Kelly and another man whose ears had been cut off. Rozier told agents that the Yahweh leader directed him to kill as many white devils as possible and to return with an ear as proof. With Rozier, the FBI had a witness who could connect Hulon Mitchell to deadly violence. But because he was a killer himself, Rozier wasn't an ideal prosecution witness. U.S. Attorney Richard Scruggs needed to find others willing to corroborate Rozier's stories.
We just started traveling all over the country, tracking down these individuals, trying to convince them to testify and to cooperate. One of the questions that we would get early on from the witnesses or from the prospective witnesses was, will I be at risk if I testify? Will something happen to me? Am I likely to get killed? It's the only time in my 22 years of experience that I have told people, because I felt like I had to tell them, is that yes, there is a chance that you will suffer retribution.
Hulon Mitchell fought the investigation by continuing to polish his public image.
I'd like everybody to give a nice warm welcome.
He continued to turn distressed buildings into gleaming properties.
The opening of the store.
As Yahweh Ben Yahweh, he toned down his anti-white message and made large contributions to popular causes.
I think it'll make the area a better place.
Watching Yahweh become stronger and stronger and watching him become more and more accepted by the community, I, as well as all of the investigators, felt he had to be stopped.
Hulon Mitchell became a bigger-than-life public figure, enjoying all the legitimacy money could buy. He seemed unstoppable. After almost a decade of investigation, the FBI still lacked enough evidence to arrest self-proclaimed Messiah, Hulon Mitchell. Intimidation and murder had silenced most who dared to speak out against him. Assistant U.S. Attorney Richard Scruggs had a difficult time persuading members to overcome their fear.
I prayed with people, I begged people, I cajoled people, I urged them to do the moral thing, I urged them to do the ethical thing, I urged them to fight a false religion, and basically used every means I had available to me to convince people to cooperate.
Those bold enough to stand up against Hulon Mitchell, the man who called himself the Son of God, were placed under witness protection.
Do hereby proclaim Sunday, October 2nd, 1990, as Yahweh Ben Yahweh Day.
As Mitchell continued to thwart the investigation privately, publicly, his legitimacy grew as Yahweh Ben Yahweh.
He's having photo op sessions with the mayor. The mayor proclaimed Yahweh Ben Yahweh Day, and there are banners on the streets saying, proclaiming Yahweh Ben Yahweh Day.
In October 1990, despite his public successes, the FBI filed sealed arrest warrants for him and a dozen of his followers. They were kept secret to allow the FBI a month to plan the arrest. Agents dubbed the plan Operation Jericho. Special Agent Herbert Cousins knew it would be dangerous to take Yahweh Ben Yahweh in Miami, since he was at the height of his popularity there.
The main issue for law enforcement was safety. The safety of the individuals, the law enforcement members involved in the arrest, and also the safety of innocent individuals and the safety of Yahweh members, including Yahweh Ben Yahweh.
Fortunately, Mitchell and others named in the indictment were scheduled to embark on a multi-city tour. Yahweh Ben Yahweh's first stop would be in New Orleans. The main arrest team would seize him at his hotel. Once he was in custody, teams in 6 other cities would capture his henchmen across the South.
There were a number of arrest teams in different cities. several cities: Atlanta, North Carolina, New Orleans, Miami. I was sent to New Orleans to assist the New Orleans division with the arrest of Yahweh Ben Yahweh.
On November 6, 1990, Hulan Mitchell arrived at the Monteleone Hotel in New Orleans. The FBI was already there.
The meeting went well.
Right.
To track Mitchell's movements, undercover agents were posted on every floor.
They're coming up now. They're coming up.
Throughout the South, teams took their positions outside Yahweh temples and waited for orders from Miami. Success depended on an unbroken flow of communication. The agents in Miami coordinated the entire operation.
Everybody's ready to go.
At 3 a.m., everyone was in place. They gave New Orleans the go-ahead. Agents in the hotel called Mitchell's room.
The first instruction was that he instruct his bodyguard to turn himself into the agents who were waiting down the hall.
Here comes the bodyguard.
The second instruction was that he come out with his hands up and that he walk slowly down the hall.
Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
Agents didn't know if Mitchell or his bodyguards were carrying weapons.
Let me see your hands.
Finally, their main suspect emerged.
Hands on your head. And on your knees.
They sent word to Miami.
You're under arrest.
Mitchell was captured.
Commit murder. Go.
You gotta go.
The other teams swarmed in, arresting the criminal members of Mitchell's temple.
Get down! Down! Get down! Next passenger. Open the side door. Step to the rear of the van.
In a matter of minutes, scores of agents mobilized to capture a dozen suspects across hundreds of miles.
Make a form of line. Stand beside each other.
No one was hurt. We accomplished our goal. We arrested as many individuals as we could identify during the operation, and that's why I believe it was very successful.
Hulan Mitchell was charged with extortion, conspiracy, and murder in aid of racketeering.
You have the right to remain silent. Maybe the same.
Prosecutor Scruggs believed he was still dangerous.
We found out that there was actually a hit team of 5 individuals who were stalking us, trying to find out where we were so that they could kill us upon the orders of Yahweh Ben Yahweh.
At trial, his intimidation even penetrated the jury.
We knew there were serious problems. We knew people were scared. Several jurors actually got dismissed prior to deliberations because they were scared to go back and deliberate.
Perhaps it was fear that caused what prosecutors considered only a partial victory. In May 1992, Hulan Mitchell and 6 of his more violent followers were found guilty of conspiracy. But Mitchell himself received only 18 years in a maximum security federal prison. It had been a difficult case for investigators.
He found a successful philosophy that people would flock to and actually start joining and pledge their allegiance to him. And I think the more power he obtained, the more influence he obtained over his followers, that he ultimately lost control of himself. And he believed in his own mind he could do anything, even order life and death.
Hulan Mitchell is locked away, his murderous actions halted by those who saw through his false gospel. In Arizona, a shipment of money vanished into the high desert, along with the 2 men hired to guard it. The FBI didn't know if the guards were participants or victims of an ambush. Answers lay somewhere in Arizona's vast Northwest Territory. FBI agents struggled to piece together scattered clues to reveal the truth.
In Arizona, an armored van loaded with cash failed to reach its destination. Authorities suspected an inside job. When the vehicle was recovered, with the drivers and the cash missing, those suspicions grew even more. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. This well-planned crime required extraordinary efforts to solve. The FBI knew that the smallest detail could make or break the case.
May 24th, 1977, Phoenix, Arizona. The security company transferred $333,000 in cash and coins from their vault to an armored van. 2 courier guards prepared for another day distributing cash to Arizona banks.
Y'all about ready to go? We got a problem with this door. I think we want to take a look at it. Let me see.
One guard discovered a problem with the van's side door latch. They would report to the company maintenance garage before they set out. This delay put Cecil Newkirk and Russell Dempsey an hour behind schedule. The day's route included stops from Phoenix, 150 miles north to Flagstaff.
This is van 26 to base.
With the delay, it would be difficult to make all the stops. Banks waited on the deliveries to provide cash to their customers.
Bureau of Security.
By 10:30 a.m., the security company received a call from a bank complaining they had not received their delivery.
Mechanical problems with the van, so we got a little late start. Well, they should be there shortly. You know,
At first, the dispatcher thought the late start explained the
All
problem.
right, we'll keep us informed. All right, bye.
But throughout the afternoon, the dispatcher couldn't reach the guards.
Base Courier 1. Dempsey, you out there? This is Base. Come on in.
By 4:30, the company contacted the FBI. The Phoenix field office broadcast an APB for the armored van to all area police. State and local authorities used the remaining light of the evening to search for the missing van. They found no sign of it or the courier guards. Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth, now retired from the FBI's Phoenix field office, wondered if the guards had driven off with the money.
One of the first things that you do is certainly look at the drivers to see whether or not that might be a possibility as to what had happened, whether there's a driver involvement.
Both of the missing guards were married. That evening, an FBI agent interviewed each of their wives separately. They confirmed that neither of their husbands had financial problems that would provoke them to steal the money. Company officials agreed. Both guards had given 20 years of faithful service. The missing van's route covered a vast area of the state. Authorities had nearly 1,000 square miles to search, and most of that terrain was remote desert. The next day, Arizona Department of Public Safety helicopters retraced the guards' scheduled route. They flew up Interstate 17, north toward Flagstaff, checking all exits. Pilots spotted the van 50 miles north of Phoenix. It had been abandoned a quarter mile off the interstate, in a remote area near the town of Bumblebee. Arizona public safety officers and local deputies cordoned off the area before the FBI arrived. Agents approached the van cautiously. They did not want to disturb the footprints tracked around the vehicle. The armored van's doors were locked. From the outside, there was little to indicate what had occurred.
There didn't appear to be a struggle on the inside, but we had to actually get inside the vehicle before we could really conduct a thorough investigation or examination of the van. And it wasn't until later on that morning that they had brought a spare set of keys out and we effected entry into the van.
The radio was still on. Yet the base had not received any calls for help. The van's siren had not been tripped. A shotgun kept in the van for defense had not been fired, and its safety was still engaged. The guards had not used any of their resources to signal that there had been a robbery. In the back, agents found bags containing several $1,000s in coins, but $293,000 in paper currency was missing. Blood spatter on the carpet and money bags indicated someone had been injured, but agents didn't know who.
Your biggest fear at the time, of course, is for the safety of the guards. Money can always be replaced. Your life cannot. And so we were certainly concerned about the guards' fate.
Amongst the footprints in the dust, investigators noted a separate set of tire tracks behind the van. Evidence technicians captured the tire prints with photos and plaster casts. Agents concluded that it was unlikely the guards had been overpowered by a single perpetrator.
The location of the van, the condition of the van, and everything that we found at the scene just told us that this was a crime that had been well planned and probably had been committed by more than one person.
Bear.
Deputy Dale Lent from nearby Mojave County was brought in to assist the investigation. A narcotics officer trained in ground print identification, Lent could reconstruct crimes from foot and vehicle prints. He was one of only 2 trackers qualified to testify in Arizona court.
The first concern was to check the area to see if the guards had been taken somewhere away from the van and something had happened to them. So the first thing I did was do a 360 around the scene, which included checking the road further up.
The guards were nowhere to be found. But on a hill near where the van was abandoned, Lent discovered more tire tracks and footprints. From this position, there was an unobstructed view of the interstate that the guards traveled. Back near the van itself, the deputy found 2 separate sets of large footprints. Based on his observations, Lent concluded that at least one other vehicle and 2 perpetrators had been involved.
The vehicle had come down, backed up near the van, picked up something up, whether it be the 2 guards or whether it be the money. Hard to tell, but I'd say it was the money because it was a trail. It wasn't just one. It was a well beat out path.
Examining the strata of tread prints, Lent deduced that one vehicle had followed the van from the interstate to where it was abandoned. Deeper tracks leading back into the interstate showed that the vehicle had left much heavier than when it came. Investigators believed that, dead or alive, the guards had been taken by the assailants. the FBI turned to the media for help.
We did what we could to keep this on the front page of the news, and we did what we could to make sure that people were aware that we were looking for these guards.
The media reports generated calls from witnesses. Several motorists claimed to have seen the van stopped on the northbound side of Interstate 17 on the morning of May 24th.
They had already been pulled over.
One saw an Arizona Department of Public Safety officer walking towards the van. Other witnesses had similar stories, but details differed. The make and color of the officer's car varied. In some accounts, he was parked in front of the van. Other times, he was stopped behind. Agents contacted the Arizona Department of Public Safety. No officers had reported stopping an armored van on I-17 that morning.
Well, at that point, I was fairly convinced that something amiss had probably happened to the guards, that somehow, someplace, they had been stopped, and they had let their guard down, and that they'd been taken captive. And being that we didn't find the guards in the immediate vicinity, it soon became evident that the guards probably were taken against their will.
The FBI and Deputy Lent searched Interstate 17 for the spot witnesses had described. The tracker found the place where he believed the van had been stopped.
The marks were fresh within the time frame, 24 to 48 hours. You could see where the door was, where somebody got out, where there were scuff marks there on the ground. It looked like, where there had been movement.
Digs and gouges in the dirt indicated that there had been a struggle near the rear of the van. A second vehicle's tire tracks at the interstate matched those in the remote area where the van had been abandoned. Curiously, the same tracks were found further up the road, just in front of where the van had been pulled over. Several motorists even underwent hypnosis to provide details to a sketch artist of what they remembered. Some recalled that the officer at the scene wore a hat. Others claimed the officer had no hat. But none of the sketches produced any leads. The FBI had reached a dead end. Then, on the morning of June 16, 1977, 300 miles northwest of where the van had been abandoned, two men made a gruesome discovery while fishing at Lake Mead. The men discovered a body floating in Debbie's Cove. They contacted the National Park Service. Investigators sped to the cove where the body had been spotted. Local law enforcement joined the National Park Service divers. They pulled close to the corpse. The body was fully clothed. Its head and torso were covered with a canvas bag. An officer retrieved a wallet from the back pocket. The victim was Russell Dempsey, one of the missing armored car guards. The divers searched the area but couldn't find the second guard's body. Not far below the surface, they discovered two sticks of wood connected by a rope.
What do you got? Okay, bring it on over to the boat here.
To investigators, it appeared to be a garrote used to strangle someone. The robbery was now a murder investigation. Investigators still had nothing that could lead them to any suspects. They only knew that an Arizona public safety officer, or someone masquerading as one, might be involved. On the morning of June 16, 1977, National Park Service divers in Arizona retrieved a dead body from Lake Mead. It was one of 2 armored car guards that had disappeared on May 24th, along with $293,000. The whereabouts of the second guard and the money remained unknown. The county medical examiner determined that the guard found in the lake had suffered a heart attack. He had also been strangled. Investigators believed that a garrote recovered near the body had been used to choke him. A strand of the victim's hair found tangled in the device supported their suspicions. FBI agents traveled to Lake Mead to question people who were familiar with the resort area. Whoever had dumped the body had likely used a boat to get to the deeper water. More than 20 agents canvassed rental shops around the 247-square-mile lake. No one reported any suspicious activity, but agents collected rental receipts in the hopes they'd eventually have a suspect's name to reference. Special Agent Laird Hestand, now retired from the FBI's Kingman Resident Agency, joined the case. He would search for names on receipts any place a traveler might have visited in the area.
We didn't have any good leads on who had committed this crime. And our assistant agent in charge in the Phoenix office decided to have FBI agents check every service station from the area where the armored car was located all the way up to Lake Mead where the body had been transported.
That was a distance of more than 300 miles. Considering all the different routes to the lake, the agents had hundreds of service stations to check. The agent started his inquiries at the station owned by an acquaintance named Stan.
I asked Stan if he had heard anything about the robbery, and he said to me, "I've been waiting for somebody to come to talk to me." And then he related to me that the day after the robbery that he had to take his tow truck up to Lake Mead and pull a truck out of the lake that had backed out into the lake.
On May 25th, Stan had received a call from 2 men whose truck was stuck at Benelli Landing on the lake. The men explained they had gotten drunk while fishing and backed their truck too close to the water. The owner didn't see any fishing equipment in the pickup, but he did notice drag marks in the dust of the flatbed. It appeared that something heavy had been hauled out of the back.
All right.
Stan brought the 2 men to his service station. He wrote a receipt and asked for a signature. The customers hesitated before one agreed to sign. The name he used was Mike Poland. The station owner believed he'd be able to identify the men if he saw them again. It was the break investigators had been hoping for. The ease by which he found it surprised Special Agent Hestand.
The first place I walk into, I developed this information. It totally caught me off guard and shocked me. And I said, "Oh boy, this is it. We finally have something that we can start from."
Agents searched for the name Michael Poland amongst the thousands of boat rental receipts collected from Lake Mead. After several hours, they found it. Michael Poland had rented a boat the day after the robbery naming Benelli Landing as his destination. It was the same spot from where his truck had been towed. Agents returned to Lake Mead, searching for additional evidence between Benelli Landing and the boat rental shop on the opposite shore. Within the breadth of that 4.5-mile span, officers spotted another bag-covered corpse floating on the surface. It was the second missing courier guard. He had been severely beaten before he was drowned. The medical examiner found 2 welts on his chest, consistent with wounds inflicted by a high-voltage taser gun. The guard's personal effects were removed, including a self-winding watch that had stopped at 10:37 p.m. on May 26th. Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth's team redoubled their search for clues at Lake Mead.
Based upon where their bodies were found and the currents and the length of time that we felt that they had been in the water itself, we were able to track back where we thought they may have been put in at Lake Mead.
That area was just 100 yards from Debbie's Cove, where the body of the first guard had surfaced. Divers focused on a ledge 12 feet down that bordered an 800-foot trench. A sweep of the ledge yielded a third canvas bag, similar to the ones that covered the bodies. The bag was sent to the FBI lab for processing. Inside the bag, agents recovered an Arizona license plate that resembled those used on Arizona public safety cruisers. 2 revolvers were also found, but no prints could be lifted from the corroded weapons. Rocks that matched those from Benelli Landing had held the bag at the bottom. Examiners also found concrete dust caked in the weave of the canvas bag. Agents called on Stan, hoping the service station owner could identify a driver's license photo of Michael Poland, one of the 2 men that had hired him to tow their pickup from Benelli Landing. Among 6 photos, Stan recognized the face of Michael Poland.
This man here?
The FBI had finally confirmed a primary suspect. They hoped Michael Poland would lead them to another. In June of 1977, the FBI pursued whoever killed 2 armored car guards and made off with $293,000. Tire tracks and footprints at the crime scene suggested that at least 2 perpetrators were involved. Agents believed one of them was Michael Poland. They hoped surveillance of Poland would lead to another. Though he did not appear to have a job, Poland was spending a lot of money. Agents saw a new motorcycle on the property. The FBI identified a man who visited frequently as Michael's younger brother, Patrick. Patrick Poland had just bought a new car. When the brothers were inside, an agent approached Michael's teenage son and complimented the new motorcycle. The boy responded that his father had recently bought 2 of them and a lot more. Agents expanded their investigation to include Patrick Poland and subpoenaed the financial records of both brothers. Prior to the armored van robbery, each had severe money problems. Shortly after, their debts had been paid and both had purchased new vehicles. Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth compared their income to their recent spending habits.
We tried to document as much as we could as to how much money they were spending and to what kind of means of support that they had. And the 2 just didn't seem to mesh very well. And when that happens, and then you know that folks have got access to a fairly large amount of money with no real means of support, that's a pretty good clue to us.
Agents interviewed the brother's father and photographed his pickup truck. Mr. Poland admitted that his sons had borrowed the truck on the day of the robbery. The father had mixed concrete in the flatbed several weeks before the robbery. Agents took a sample of the dust for processing. FBI examiners analyzed the concrete sample. They compared it to the cement dust on the canvas bags recovered from Lake Mead. Examiners concluded that the dust on the bag had come from the same batch of concrete taken from the truck. Once again, the FBI asked Stan to look at a photo lineup. The station owner could not identify Patrick Poland as the man with Michael.
This isn't the truck. It looks exactly like when I lowered it right down.
But he did recognize their father's truck as the one he towed from the lake.
That's it. That's it.
Positively.
In the early morning of July 27, 1977, agents arrived at Michael Poland's house with a search warrant. Poland claimed to be a self-employed jewelry salesman. He said that on the day of the heist, he was in Las Vegas buying gems.
There 3 days. What did you do on the way back?
Investigators found $12,000 in cash. He claimed it was used for their jewelry business. The agents confiscated numerous receipts. One of them was for a pair of high-voltage taser guns sold to a man named Mark Harris a month before the robbery. A short distance away, agents searched the house of Michael's brother, Patrick Poland. FBI Special Agent Frank Mowry, now retired, asked if he and his brother Michael had been at Lake Mead. Patrick gave a different story than his brother had.
He initially said that he and his brother were there fishing. He was very nervous. He was extremely nervous. He had difficulty in explaining a lot of about his whereabouts, particularly on the day of the crime and the day after the crime.
While Patrick was being interviewed, he received a call. It was his brother Michael.
Yeah, they're over here too.
He urged Patrick not to talk to investigators. The search at Patrick's house yielded a stash of weapons and $16,000 in cash. The FBI tracked down and processed the cars the brothers owned before the robbery.
Different.
The tire treads did not match the tracks found at the crime scene. Examiners found no physical evidence that tied the cars to the crime. Agents visited the gun store where the tasers had been sold to Mark Harris prior to the robbery. The clerk who had made the sale could only remember that Harris was a white male in his 20s. Since the receipt was found in Michael Poland's home, they theorized it was probably his alias.
One of the things the FBI does is try to eliminate all other good logical suspects, and we did this in that case. The name Mark Harris, a rather common name, we had to eliminate that name as being anybody other than the alias of Mike Poland.
Special Agent Mowry searched public records for a Mark Harris between the ages of 25 and 40.
We actually identified literally hundreds of Mark Harrises from vehicle records, motor vehicle records, phone books, and every way we could, and went out to their houses physically, tracked them down and interviewed them, and found that they did not have anything to do with this crime.
With no proof that Mark Harris was an alias for Michael Poland, and no physical evidence tying the brothers to the crimes, agents couldn't arrest the brothers. For the next 10 months, all agents could do was keep careful track of their movements. Special Agent Chenoweth flew helicopter surveillance.
We wanted to know everything that Michael and Patrick Poland did, what they had done in the past, what they were going to do in the future.
Investigators continued to document the brothers' spending habits. They watched as the Polands closed a deal on a gaming arcade. Despite the circumstantial evidence, agents were unable to make an arrest. The FBI had to find stronger physical evidence to prevent the Poland brothers from getting away with murder. In April of 1978, the FBI suspected Michael and Patrick Poland of killing 2 courier guards and stealing nearly $300,000. After 11 months of investigation, agents did not have enough to convince a grand jury to indict. FBI Special Agent Frank Mowry desperately searched for evidence that would strengthen the case.
What we badly needed was physical evidence. We didn't have fingerprints. We didn't have any real good eyewitnesses. We didn't have any physical bits of evidence that could link Mike and Pat Poland to the crime.
The agent focused on the 3 canvas bags retrieved from Lake Mead with the guards' bodies. He checked with over 20 sources in the Phoenix area where the bags might have been manufactured. None recognized the work.
Nobody could even give me a hint of who in town would make such a bag. Some even said, well, they probably came from out of town. So I became very discouraged.
The agent visited the last store on his list and showed the bag. The owner recognized it as coming from his company. It was a custom size with a unique stitch sewn only by their seamstresses. He also identified the specially ordered cord purchased from a Georgia company. As far as the owner knew, his was the only shop in the area that made anything like it.
He said, I will have in my record somewhere a receipt, because somebody would have walked in that door there and they would have said, I need to order so many bags, a certain length, a certain width, certain specifications.
At the Phoenix FBI office, agents pored over hundreds of receipts covering years of business from the bag manufacturer. After almost a week, they found one receipt for 3 custom canvas bags dated 1 month before the robbery. They were sold to a man named Mark Harris.
That's the Harris.
Agents had seen the name before on a receipt for a pair of tasers. They had found the voucher months earlier during a search of Michael Poland's house.
Hold on a second, Frank.
The FBI was further convinced that Mark Harris was an alias for Michael Poland. The canvas bag receipt connected the alias to the murdered guards, and cement dust in the pickup the brothers drove matched dust found in the bags. On May 17, 1978, after nearly a year of investigation, a federal grand jury returned an indictment for murder, kidnapping, and robbery against Michael and Patrick Poland.
Gentlemen, these men should both be considered extremely armed.
The FBI suspected that the Polands would not surrender quietly.
They've both already killed 2 men that we know of. You got your route plan. You're going to be picking up Patrick. We're going to be picking up Mike. Check your weapons. Check your vest.
Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth believed an armed confrontation was possible.
It had to be very well and meticulously planned. The Polands were very violent. They had shown their violence. They had a strong propensity to commit violence, as evidenced by the guards' fate. And one of the things that we absolutely knew we could not do was to arrest them while they were in the house. And we absolutely had to take them away from the homes.
Agents feared the suspects would barricade themselves in their houses and shoot it out if they discovered they were going to be arrested.
This guy, yeah.
Agents waited for Patrick Poland to emerge.
Yep.
When he finally did, they noticed he was carrying a case for a handgun. They tailed him for a safe place to make the arrest. The second arrest team waited for Michael Poland to come out of a real estate office. Once outside, there would be less risk to bystanders if shooting erupted. The first arrest team caught up with Patrick outside the game arcade. The agents intercepted him before he entered the building.
Back up. Back up. Put your hands up.
We identified ourselves. Of course, he knew me already from previous contacts, and I told him the time had come and we had warrants for their arrest, and he gave up without any problem. He was armed. He had a .44 Magnum weapon on him and another couple of weapons in his car, but he made no effort to use them.
Agents radioed the other team that Patrick had been picked up. Michael Poland had been in the real estate office for almost 45 minutes. Agents feared that he had somehow gotten word of Patrick's arrest and was preparing for an armed confrontation. They decided to risk entering the building.
Federal agents, please step back. Mike Poland, you're under arrest.
The suspected murderer surrendered without incident. Michael Poland refused to answer questions. He insisted his brother do the same. No fingerprints tied either brother to the murdered guards or the abducted van. Michael remained confident that the FBI case was weak.
In a case like this, you've got a joint venue. Venue certainly lies with the federal government with respect to the actual robbery of the van, and but we also have a homicide case that rests with the state authorities.
Authorities considered their best strategy for a successful prosecution. State and federal prosecutors decided to split the charges. The Polands went on trial for robbery and kidnapping in federal court. Based on the circumstantial evidence gathered, a federal jury found the brothers guilty of the charges on February 15, 1979. They were sentenced to 100 years.
These were two guards that were very hardworking, very loyal to their company. Both of them had worked for about 20 years for the company. They were actually within weeks of retiring. They were family men, they were good men, religious men, men that had devoted a lot of time and effort and loyalty to this company. And on the eve of their retirement, they were killed.
In November of 1979, an Arizona state jury returned a guilty verdict for murder. The judge gave the brothers the death penalty. The Polands appealed their conviction. The Arizona Supreme Court found that the testimony of a hypnotized witness and the taser gun evidence should not have been used. They also found that the jury had inappropriately discussed the federal trial. The Poland brothers' state murder convictions were overturned. Though agents were certain that the brothers had brutally murdered two men, state prosecutors would not seek a new trial. Because of parole laws at the time, Michael and Patrick Poland would be eligible for parole in less than 7 years. In 1982, an Arizona prosecutor declined to retry Michael and Patrick Poland for murder.
We've chosen not to because of the exclusion of the eyewitness testimony.
He cited the cost, as well as the difficulty of proving the case with the evidence that had been excluded by the Arizona Supreme Court. United States Attorney Melvin McDonald was outraged that the Poland brothers might get away with murder.
I had followed it by way of the media and had never dreamed that I would play any role in the case until 1982, when it became clear that the ball was going to get dropped unless somebody stepped in. I called the county attorney and volunteered to take the case.
For the first time in history, a U.S. attorney was deputized as an Arizona state prosecutor. McDonald had to resurrect a case that many considered impossible to retry.
There had been 5 years transpired between the time of the crime and the time of the trial. Witnesses travel and move all over the country. Memories start to fade. And so you've got to recreate and present the crime as if it happened a month ago, when you're facing the problem that it's really 5 years old.
The prosecutor wanted to lock down the exact time that the victims had been deposited into Lake Mead and prove it was the same time the Polands were at the lake, so there would be no question the Polands were responsible.
One of the problems with the finding of the guards was that their bodies were not recovered for 6 weeks. The defense, we knew, would argue that they could have been dumped there by the real killers at any time.
Working with the FBI, the prosecutor found a piece of evidence that had been overlooked in the earlier trials. The second guard's self-winding watch. Examiners noted that the watch stopped at 10:37 p.m. on May 26th. That particular self-winding watch would stop working if it weren't moved for 12 hours. That meant that the guard's watch stopped 12 hours after his arm came to rest at the bottom of Lake Mead.
We actually had watch experts take the watch apart to prove that the watch had not stopped because of water damage. There was no water that had gotten into the portions of the watch that controlled its operation. We literally went all the way to Switzerland to get experts there to talk about how much time it would take for a watch that hadn't been cleaned in 5 years to finally unwind.
To the jury, please.
Forensics experts used this information to determine exactly when the bodies had been dumped into the water. Their estimation exactly matched the time the FBI had established that the Polands were at the lake, getting their pickup towed from Benelli Landing. The prosecutor explained that the brothers had been there to dump the bodies.
For the drama point, I told the jury that while Mr. Newkirk is dead, he is speaking to you from the grave. He's asking you, look at my watch. I'm sending you a message through my watch.
After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury was convinced.
Will the defendants rise?
On November 18th, 1982, they found Michael and Patrick Poland guilty of murder. The judge reinstated a sentence of death.
All rise.
Once again, the defendants appealed the conviction.
It was one of the rare instances where their case went to the United States Supreme Court. And the United States, in a published opinion, a very closely divided court, again affirmed their conviction and sentences.
How the situation...
With nothing left to lose, Patrick Poland agreed to tell investigators and the families of the victims exactly what happened. In 1987, he gave his confession to FBI Special Agent Frank Mowry.
They had actually spent almost a year tailing the van. They knew its route. On those mornings that it went up to Prescott and delivered its money to the banks in Prescott, they knew the exact route. They knew the stops that it made. They knew the times that it did it. They knew everything about it.
The Polands used neither of their own cars in the robbery. They had rented one with cash that the FBI was unable to trace.
We never found it. It was a rental car. And by the time the rental car was taken back, by the time they figured out what was going on, it had been rented out probably 200 times since then. And we were never able to actually pin down for certainty the car that may have been used in the case.
The brothers affixed a light bar and a license plate that resembled those used by the Arizona Department of Public Safety.
Batteries fully for the CV?
I believe so.
They readied their tools needed for the heist.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we got a spare set.
Good. You got enough ammunition?
Yeah.
The Polands waited more than an hour. The van was unexpectedly delayed. Finally, they saw their quarry. Patrick drove the disguised car while Michael hid under the dash. They stopped the van on the pretext of speeding. Company policy insisted that the guards never open the van doors to anyone, even if stopped by the police. Patrick ordered the driver to step out. When he failed to follow procedure, the driver and his partner were defenseless. The Polands put the guards in the rear of the van. Michael was to drive the van while Patrick drove the car. But when Patrick took off, the van didn't follow. This explained the tracks found in front of where the van was stopped. By the time Patrick reached the rear of the van, Michael was beating the guards. They stunned the guards with high-voltage tasers. The brothers drove the vehicles into the desert near the town of Bumblebee.
Pat.
One of the guards looked as if he had died from the beating. Michael decided that the other would have to die as well. He had a makeshift garrote in his pocket, a cord tied to 2 pieces of wood.
And the one thing we found out about it, of course, is that Mike was obviously the planner, the instigator, and the enforcer, and everything related to the crime, and that he was the one who physically murdered the 2 guards. Pat, of course, helped him at Mike's insistence, but it was Mike who put the rope around their neck and choked them.
Went around in the back.
Patrick claimed that Michael had buried most of the money in the desert.
Just had to stop.
At least one of the Polands' relatives knew where that was. Because she cooperated, the authorities didn't prosecute her for her involvement. The money had rotted from the elements in the intervening years. Patrick's confession gave closure to the case.
We knew most of it. We felt better, of course, when the person actually admits it, because there's always some room for doubt until you get it from the heart and from the mouth of the perpetrator.
The courts turned down all appeals for the Polands. The state of Arizona finally administered a lethal injection to Michael Poland on June 16, 1999. After all calls for clemency were denied, Patrick Poland was executed 9 months later on March 15, 2000. Unlike his older brother, Patrick used his final moments to express regret for the pain and suffering he had caused.